Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Today, we're going to do a session on DRR and optimizing search results with DRR. And we're going to really talk about why relevancy matters in Algolia and how DRR kind of fits into that. So hosting this session is going to be myself. My name's Elias. I'm a tech lead at Algolia. I've been here for 2.5 years now. And before that, I was a software engineer, still working in the search space. And in my free time, depending on the season, in the winter, I love to ski. And in the summer, you could pretty much find me riding a bike every day after work. Marcus.
Thanks, Elias. Hey, everyone. My name is Marcus Walters, and I'm a customer solutions architect at Algolia. And I've been working here for about a little over 3 years now. And I started my journey in healthcare IT before I pivoted to, working here at Algolia software. And yeah, it's my goal to help consult, educate, and support all the enterprise customers I deal with on their implementation endeavors. And my free time, I like working on microcontrollers and home integrations and things like that. So if any of you know what Home Assistant is, I use that a lot at home. So nice to meet your acquaintance. I'll pass it back over to you, Elias.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about the agenda. So the main thing is we're going to, do an overview of what dynamic re-ranking is. And then we're going to talk about where DRR fits in the overall ranking strategy in Algolia. I'll do a little bit of an overview kind of demo on the actual dashboard itself, go over the actual ranking strategy, and then talk about how DRR fits into that. And then finally, at the very end, Marcus will do kind of a coding demo on different use cases where we can enable or disable dynamic re-ranking in the front end. And then Marcus, it's all you.
All right. So let's move into what is dynamic ranking. So imagine this scenario here. We're at a pharmaceutical company and we're searching for face mask. So before 2020, if you were to search for face mask, you'd probably get some sort of product that looks equivalent to this, some sort of, beauty product that would wrap around your face for all those particular reasons. But after 2020, after COVID, after, the pandemic, the things that occurred during that time, face mask really dramatically changed in our impressions and what it meant. So at least for me right now, I know if I search for face mask, I will most likely associate it with the product on the right as opposed to the left. And the question here is, how can we anticipate changes in search rapidly and at scale? Because as I prefaced this with a pharmaceutical company, they may sell both, and merchandisers who work there, those are both valid products. How do you know which one to boost based off of customer engagement? Well, here with Algolia, we would dynamically re-rank search results based off of user engagement. So with respect to dynamic re-ranking and what that sort of brings us to answer the question, dynamic re-ranking automatically reorders and returns search results based off of real-time user interactions, so clicks and conversions. An easier way to think about this is imagine the wisdom of the crowd. So everyone in aggregate may gravitate towards things that are more popular at the time based off of trends, just as the example I gave before. And that sort of logic under the hood in dynamic ranking is what is able to sort of automatically reorder results with respect to Algolia's ranking strategy. Over time, this will definitely help improve relevance as a feature, as it continuously learns from user behavior to be able to show the most relevant products without manual intervention. And the keyword here is manual intervention. You always have the ability as an end user or merchandiser of Algolia to pin or boost items, but at scale, that is very difficult. There's so many different searches, so many different popular searches that it's impossible to be able to target all of these and be able to influence the results with the data and signals available. So that's one of the values here of dynamic ranking with respect to being able to boost and influence the results. And then the last piece of what dynamic ranking is as a feature of Algolia and what it allows is seamless integration. So the ability to actually integrate with your existing implementation, ranking setup, and the ability to have minimal development effort are all things that dynamic ranking can do. It's as simple as turning on a couple of toggles in the dashboard, assuming you have information available, and then being able to leverage the feature in full. So I actually do want to talk a bit more tangibly about some of these requirements, which I have here on this next slide. Prerequisites needed for dynamic ranking. So the prerequisites that are needed to enable this feature and get the value out of it are essentially two major things here. You want to be able to send click and conversion events and that they're activated in your particular integration of choice, which may include one of our many e-commerce integrations, our Algolia front-end libraries, any of the connectors, et cetera, or any of the API clients, typically the JavaScript one. And the idea is you want to be able to pass all the click and conversion events that have been validated into our Insights API, which we can then use to power and hydrate the feature. And you want to have sufficient data volume for those particular records to be promoted for a given search, ideally 20 click events or 2 conversion events within a 30-day window for it to be boosted or buried based off of a particular query like face mask. So with those prerequisites in mind, let's take a moment just to go through a configuration walkthrough, or at least what it looks like in the dashboard and how you can configure dynamic ranking. What the simulator is, we haven't talked about it yet, but there's a simulator that lets you see the before and after of results, and then how it helps with testing and validating the feature. So I have another tab here that I'm going to pop into, and this is the Algolia dashboard. I have clicked on the re-ranking section underneath the enhance and re-ranking. And from here, you can see that this is what it looks like in a moment with respect to dynamic ranking being enabled. No images here, but I'm going to show you some images in a second. Let's say you have an index that does not have re-ranking enabled. I'm going to click on one of these. Oops. Let's try that again. And hit refresh. All right. I got booted out. Let's log back in and try this again. You will be greeted with a page that looks similar to this. So if you haven't enabled the feature, but you have search available, you'll probably see something like this on your first run through of going to the section of the dashboard. And this is where you'd want to click on start simulating for the feature to be enabled and start processing the events to then be able to boost or bury results. When you hit that, you'll be greeted with an experience that looks similar to this. So I have a index here, e-commerce keyword prod, and you can see that there are a handful, thousands of queries that have been re-ranked already, and including browsing facets. So we'll talk about this in a moment, but what you're seeing right here, this is the dynamic re-ranking simulator. This is where you'll be able to get your first foray into what is actually happening when dynamic rank is enabled. And on the left, you can see the before search results for the query in question, iPhone case, and then the after results with dynamic re-ranking enabled. This little matrix here in the middle shows where a product on the left was either pushed down or pulled up based off of dynamic re-ranking and its attractiveness score. So if I hover over this little dot here in the bottom left of any of these products, you can see its attractiveness score. It's calculated based off of the signals we mentioned earlier, such as clicks and conversions. And these are what influence its boosting or burying of its representation for this query. So this is essentially what will happen at the end of a particular search. And the way you can modify and change the behavior of dynamic ranking is by going to the settings. You'll most likely need to come here at least once or a handful of times initially to get the feature set up correctly. But then after that, again, it really is dynamic. It really is pretty hands-off at that point. This section of the dashboard has multiple options here that allow you to change the way that dynamic ranking works. The first one I'll talk about here is the browsing facet. You have the ability to select if there is a browsing facet. I'm on another tab here under advanced settings, but think of a browsing facet as, hey, I'm on a site that has category pages, maybe something multi-departmental, like a Walmart, for instance. There's a TV category, or there is a health and beauty category. These will all list under a particular attribute in your data that might look like something like this, category page ID. In order for Algolia to re-rank results based off of that, we need to specify that here. And then that will allow us to re-rank those, because in Algolia, those are considered empty queries. There's no actual query being sent, but there is a filter or a browsing facet that's being supplied. And we need to know what that is upfront so we can be able to influence the results as we see fit with this. In addition to the section of the dashboard, should you have access to the beta feature, there are additional features here that can influence dynamic ranking, such as being able to re-rank empty queries outright, or potentially increase the cadence of how you refresh dynamic ranking. Again, this is taking in all the signals of your events over a 30-day window and is influencing and re-ranking the results. It typically does this daily, but you could potentially go more if you have access to this beta feature. So feel free to reach out to us via our contact forms if you are interested in something like this. But let's go back here to the settings. So you can see that there are a couple of settings beyond browsing facet: re-ranking filters, grouping similar queries, re-ranked hits, re-ranking filters. This is a really good configuration that can let you re-rank items that only match a particular condition. So the idea here is you want to be able to influence and boost or bury products dynamically, but you don't want to always do that for every product. Imagine if you have products that have a stock count and these products go out of stock. You wouldn't want to boost items that are out of stock and potentially sour the experience. So you could potentially even add in a re-rank condition, such as in stock is true, assuming that's how your data is modeled, to be able to limit only re-ranking products that are in stock as opposed to boosting products out of stock. This can work in conjunction with popular items because they can always get boosted, and then eventually they can set back into their regular spot after they go out of stock for other products to then take their spot based off of clicking conversion events. Grouping similar queries. So this section here is just what allows you to be able to group similar queries based off of words or conjugations, such as red shoes or shoe and red, or tooth and teeth, and all these other similar words that can be grouped together depending on the language. This can really help make the experience a bit more consistent with queries across the scale of the site. You have the ability to also select how many re-ranked hits you want. So by default, it is 20, but you can re-rank at most 100 hits on a particular search query. I would recommend using this sparingly, or at least with consideration, because this can change the order of all of your results if you let it, depending on how popular the query is. So we can see here we've re-ranked at most 14 products, but as mentioned, you could re-rank up to 100 depending on how much impact you want dynamic ranking to have on your relevance. The last two pieces here, and then we'll segue back into the simulator momentarily, is event freshness. So taking seasonality into account. So when enabled, this means that essentially newer events will outweigh older events. So events that came out yesterday or a couple of days ago will have a higher influence than results or events that came out almost a month ago. So that might mean a click event from yesterday is worth more than a conversion that happened last month. That can work at scale, and it makes sure that the results are a bit more fresh compared to what might happen outside of a particular sales cycle. And then lastly, the event source index. So again, the key thing here is we need events to power dynamic ranking. And it's possible that a particular index that you're using may not necessarily have events. Maybe it's a replica index for sorting or whatnot. You can choose an event source, and then that can be able to pass in its events into this index to then power the feature. So this is a really good way to be able to test out, for example, dynamic ranking in a lower environment, which may not get any traffic, if you know you have events coming in from your production or higher level environments, to be able to test out the feature and then eventually put it through into your production application. You can, with all of these settings here, be able to test out the feature, see how results get reordered, potentially add in additional filters, facet filters, numeric filters, context. You have the ability to try a lot of things that Algolia already lets you do for a typical search in the dashboard, on top of dynamic ranking, to make sure the results look good. And ultimately, the idea is you want to activate the feature or launch an A/B test to be able to see the value of dynamic ranking. And the idea is, after launching an A/B test, ideally with the feature, you get higher click-through and conversion rates in aggregate across your index versus it being lower. And that's typically is the case, that you get higher clicking conversion by activating this feature. It's a really valuable feature to have after going live and getting those events into your index. So hopefully you got a good overview of what this is and where you typically go to configure this. Enable it by starting simulating. I'm going to pass this back over to the slides here, and let's segue back over to the next section of our agenda for today that Elias is going to take over. So I'm actually going to stop my screen share and pass it over to you, Elias.
Sounds good to me. Alrighty, I will start sharing my screen, and then we'll open up the slides. So the next section here is really going to be talking about where DRR fits within Algolia's ranking strategy. And, in order to do that, I wanted to talk about basically how Algolia does re-ranking or ranking in general, in order for us to kind of understand where DRR would fit in. So one, Algolia utilizes a tie-breaking strategy in order to rank results. So you can kind of think of the tie-breaking strategy like a funnel with steps, and each step in that funnel is a rule that we're going to use to group and order the results. And as we go through that funnel, we'll break ties, and that will kind of ultimately lead us to our final order of results. Now, the order of the ranking strategies is going to be as follows. We'll first have textual ranking rules, and I'll go over a little bit more in detail of what those are. And within kind of that section, we're going to have this notion of boosting and burying products using rules. I'll talk about that as well in a little bit more details. Then we'll have custom ranking. So that's basically any sort of business metrics that you might want to have. This could be sales, this could be popularity, rating, and so on. And then we'll have dynamic re-ranking, which will kind of exist outside of that funnel in a sense, because dynamic re-ranking will be able to influence results like Marcus showed, but it'll be able to influence results that are outside of essentially that kind of textual ranking and boosting and burying. So it can actually override the default order. And then finally, there's going to be that manual pinning. So manual pinning is going to be kind of the ultimate decider. So if I go into a rule and I create a manual pin for the first 3 positions, dynamic re-ranking will not be able to override that. So given that, I do want to do a quick walkthrough of the ranking strategy in the dashboard. So I'll talk about that textual ranking, and I'll do an overview of how boosting and burying works and how that actually is going to play into DRR. So let me actually go back here and start sharing a different window. Share. Okay, and I'll make it a little bit bigger just in case. Okay, so I'm here on the Algolia dashboard, and gonna make me reset. There we go. Okay, so I'm on the Algolia dashboard, and I'm on this the same demo index that Marcus was showing earlier, and you can see that I have a search for Samsung. And what I wanted to show here is kind of initial set of results that we're getting for this search. And so we can see that we're getting this first product here. It's a TV. And I want you to kind of look at a couple things here. Sales, it's got this number here. Is accessories is set to false. The category popularity rounded is set to 4. And what I want you to notice is, and this you can see in any of your indices, is this little kind of medallion down here at the bottom that kind of actually gives an explanation of why a certain result is coming up where it is. And so you can see here there's ranking criterions, and it goes from 0 to 7, and that's basically the textual ranking. And then there's the personalization, or there's the 7th spot, which is the custom ranking, and it is talking about all the custom business metrics that we have set. So if I go actually into the configuration and go to ranking and sorting, we can kind of see what these are in a little bit more detail. And so one thing that I want to really highlight is this here, this filters section of the ranking and sorting. So the description on here is score of filters when using the optional filters or filter scoring features. Now, generally, what this is really referring to is our ability in Algolia to create a rule to boost or bury depending on, whether it's depending on the query that's typed in, or depending on maybe the category page that we're on. Maybe we want to boost a certain product type, or maybe we wanted to do some specific boost. When that happens, it usually happens in this step. And so I can actually give an example of that occurring. And after we go through these textual steps, again, we go over the actual custom ranking. So what I wanted to do, and this is something that you can also do, in order to test basically what would happen if I was to create a rule to boost, for example, books, without actually doing that rule, there's a cool thing that we can do in the dashboard, is to add a query parameter. And so if we go and click on that, we can do a custom parameter in here. This is actually something that you can type in, optional filters. Now, in this data set, I'm going to use category page ID, which basically is the category that a certain products belong to. And so for you, it might be a different attribute, but that attribute does have to be one that is set as an attributes for faceting. Otherwise, this won't work. And that goes for boosting and burying rules using the rules dashboard in general. So category page ID, and I'm going to boost books. Okay, now you can see as soon as I did that, my result set has now changed, and I can see even for a query like Samsung, there are some books that match. And what we can see here is that the first, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first 5 results are all books, and so those are being boosted all the way to the top. And then what we can also see is that because this is happening at this step in the ranking, we'll start to actually go down the funnel again and look at the other ranking criteria, including the custom ranking, in order to actually separate these, tie break these 4 records. And so we can see here, if we look at the medallion again, we can see the tiebreaker is set to sales. So the previous result has higher sales value than this one. So that's why these two are broken up. Now, it's important to note that because dynamic re-ranking is happening after all of this, if we actually go to the re-ranking page here for Samsung, oh, let's see, Samsung. I can see this was my initial result set here, and this is what re-ranking is doing. You'll notice if I put in, let's see, a custom filter, and I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did earlier, optional filters. And then we'll do category page ID, set this to books. You can see in my previous view, you can see that the books are being pushed up. But when we look at the dynamic re-ranking factors, you can see that it's still re-ranking. It's still re-ranking these top 13, and they're overriding my boost on books. So this is something important to note, that if I had, a bunch of manually curated pages or queries with rules boosting, that dynamic re-ranking will override those. However, as I said, if I was to create a rule to pin certain items, dynamic re-ranking will respect those pins. And in certain use cases, for example, maybe certain queries or certain category pages, we can use rules to turn off dynamic re-ranking only for that specific use case. So for example, I'll go in here, I can create this rule to deactivate dynamic re-ranking. And if I turn that on, then only for the query Samsung, dynamic re-ranking will not be turned on. So given that, I've kind of given one use case actually just now of how to disable dynamic re-ranking. Marcus will actually go into some other use cases on how to disable dynamic re-ranking, but actually in code on the front end. So I'll actually stop sharing and pass it back over to you, Marcus.
All right. Thanks, Elias. Let me pull this up here. Okay. And share screen. Okay. So I'm sharing my screen, and what we're doing now is we're going to take a look at another walkthrough here, implementation walkthrough. And in this one, we're going to look at how to enable dynamic re-ranking in a code sandbox. So this is an environment that has exposure to the front end, and it's something that Elias will be able to share in the chat, so you can follow along if you want to look at the code independently of what I'm trying to do here. And we're going to go through an example configuration for a dynamic re-ranking use case, where we're going to try to look at the browser information, or particularly the user agent, to try and turn on or turn off dynamic re-ranking. So over here in my new tab, let me see if I can zoom in here. I do this. Okay. It might be a bit too close for comfort, but hopefully this will be visible for you all on your screens. I have a code sandbox here that has a lot of things going on, but what I want you to at least take away from this is that a code sandbox here will just have all of the front-end code that will allow us to load up an example implementation here for Algolia. So in this case, it's leveraging the same index that we had seen in the previous part of our workshop thus far. And we're able to see all of the code with respect to Algolia's JavaScript instance search implementation. in context. So we have a bunch of different widgets here that are being pulled in. We have the search instance that's being returned back and some additional HTML that's used to render the page also on top of this. This is a bit reactive right now, so it's showing the mobile view just because I've zoomed in. If I zoom out, you should be able to see the desktop view here in full, slightly changed. So what I want us to focus on is, with respect to dynamic ranking, we've talked about how you configure it in the dashboard. We've talked about its influence in the dashboard. On the front end, with code, how do you actually configure the feature or toggle it or do things of that nature? So the way you would do that, at least what I'm going to focus on is on instantiation, is underneath your configuration for instance search, which can be accessed through a configuration widget. I have it in a different file here. You have the ability in your configuration widget to pass one or many search parameters that can be toggled on upon instantiating instance search. So you can see some examples here for attributes to snippet ellipsis text, remove words of no results, and then enable reranking. And with enable reranking, that's essentially your access point into enabling or disabling the feature. It's a Boolean. So if I was to do something like this, I've enabled dynamic ranking for this particular implementation. Let me see if I can try to zoom in again here so you all can see that a bit better. And then I'm going to see if I can bring this over. Okay. So right here, line 18, to enable reranking from the front end, should you need to, it's as simple as just adding in another parameter and setting it to true. You can also disable it by setting it to false. And what's happening here is, even though you may have enabled the feature on your index from the Algolia dashboard, potentially from an index setting on the API side as well, which is accessible, upon the actual search context, whether it's search, browse, wherever you're actually implementing it, you can still override that at query time by being able to toggle this parameter here. And with respect to the use case that I wanted to talk about, the user agent, it is one of 3 that we actually have discussed that we want to share as a takeaway for you all. And I'm going to actually go over that in a moment. Let me see if I can bring this over here. We have 3 use cases here actually for geolocation, browser information, that's the second one, and then an internal use case for whether the search is coming from an internal user, someone who maybe works at a kiosk, or someone who's actually an end user of your particular customer base. I've structured my configuration TypeScript here to actually have a utility function that contains and can pull in any of these use cases. And I've wrapped it in a promise just because sometimes my particular utilities, I might have one that is pulling from another API. You may need to do that for yourself to get that to work. We can then pull in, and depending on the use case, either get a Boolean as a response that we can then pass in to enable or disable dynamic ranking. So I'm going to change this back to enable reranking. And what you're seeing here is I'm returning this back into my search function, the result of the get enable reranking function up here. That is taking a function that I've specified in my utilities dynamic use case live. That's over here on the left-hand side. So I'm going to scroll over here and let's go into that. Right now, that function here in the utility is passing false because there's nothing in there. But let's say we actually wanted to get some information. We can do something as simple as pulling in user agent. And then from here, we can then be able to pass in our navigator and then user agent. And by pulling in the function this way, we can be able to get the particular value that is associated with the dashboard, or not the dashboard, the web browser of the end user. And then from here, it's really up to your use case. I'm going to pull out two. I want to be able to toggle for Android users and for desktop in this case, or at least have the flexibility to enable or disable depending on what I see. So I'm going to pull in another function here, or at least another constant. And I'm going to call it is Android. So inside of here, I'm going to actually do a regex expression so that I can be able to pull out Android from the actual user agent. Here we go. And I'm going to do the same thing here for the desktop. And then in this case, let's check for Windows. Let's check for Macintosh. And then let's also check for Linux. Okay. All right, so now we have two variables that we can use to test and see if it's true. And in this case, if it's not any of these, we're going to pass back false. And that will be down here in this particular return. But up here, we're actually going to have, let me see here. We're going to do results. And then we're going to pass in Android or is desktop. And then here, let me see here, if results okay. So what we've done so far, just to sort of take a step back, is we've checked the user agent and we're pulling out information to identify whether it's Android, whether it's Windows, Mac, or Linux, to know if it's from a desktop application. And then we're just feeding in whether either of those have been supplied as true. And if it's not, then it would be false. And in this case, the pattern here is we're going to return true as a Boolean, which will then return that value as a part of our configuration here. That will be returned into get enable reranking. We're passing in a variable here that will then supply that for our instantiation. So if I go back to my use case live, let's just hit save. And I'm going to open this part of the window here a bit more. Let's drag this over. What will be the signifier for letting us know we've worked and actually achieved what we need is I have a little console log that says enable reranking here, and it's going to pull in the value here. And ideally, if I did this right, we should see it set to true because it's identified my browser, and we can see that in the console log. So I'm going to hit refresh. If I scroll up, we can see that enable reranking has been set to true. So what that means here is for this particular use case, we've set it to true upon instantiation. And now this configuration will be passed into the overall instant search window, and it will be able to start instant search with that in mind. It'll be a parameter that will be there for all subsequent queries with respect to any searches or filtering in that particular context. So that is one way you could do it. And you might see that for most of this example here and what I've gone through, a lot of the configuration really is more so on your use case and what you define as important as a consideration or conditional for dynamic ranking. At its core, it really is an AI feature that's mostly hands-off. It's something that you would just need to pass in as a parameter, similar to the other ones here. So there's not that much you would have to do as a developer here to potentially change this, potentially outside of maybe the UI state and maybe changing it after a configuration has changed elsewhere in the page. But it's mostly just a parameter of true or false that you'd have to leverage to do that. So that's what we have here for our demo and for our walkthrough. We have additional use cases, as I've mentioned, that you can take a look at for geolocation and for context, if you'd like to try out those. And anything else that you may have questions on, feel free to reach out to our support channels on this. We'd be happy to help you going forward. Let me switch back over to the slides here, and we will actually get ready to close out the walkthrough of the code and everything else we've done up for today. So let me hit the next slide. So that's actually the end of what we have. I just wanted to sort of quickly, on top of thanking you all for doing this and being able to be here for us, just sort of summarize, we went through what dynamic ranking was. We went through where it fits in the relevance strategy with Algolia and all the other features. And then we also went through how you can enable it on the front end, depending on an additional use case that you may particularly need for your implementation. So feel free to reach out to either Elias or myself at our particular socials. And Elias, anything you want to add before I guess we finish out?
Well, I mean, I was just looking at the chat. There's a question about dynamic re-ranking being available on all plans. So dynamic re-ranking is going to be available on the build and premium plans. Won't be available on the free plans. And if you guys want, if there's any questions, anything like that you want answered, live, we can stay on maybe a little bit. And then when is DRR shipping? Oh no, it's already a feature available in Algolia. It's been available, I think, for 2-3 years now.
Yeah, I guess that maybe add to when it's shipping. There were some advanced or features that were in beta. Those are coming out at a later date. Higher cadences to refresh and the ability to choose more browsing facets. That part I would say is a TBD that you can actually find out more on our changelog.algolia.com. I'm going to put this in the chat as well. This is where you can find out when features are coming out across all of Algolia, not only dynamic ranking, but other things that are of public announcement.
How did you say we could opt into beta for hourly re-rank? That's actually a good question, Marcus. Did you know, is there a specific place where they could?
Yeah, I would say that at least in terms of getting contact for that, it might be best to reach out to either, if you're on enterprise, your accounting team, or anyone else who has a direct line to Algolia. If not that, reaching out through support at Algolia, making a ticket. That would be one of the easier ways to be able to confidently know, based off of your plan, whether you can opt in and get access to the feature and try out everything that it has to offer. All right. Yeah, I always think good call. We should definitely stay around for any time anyone has any questions up until the hour.
Yeah, I think I'm good with that. I hope this session is saved. I think so. Okay, cool. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, James.
Yeah. I guess we'll give it a couple minutes between each question. If there's nothing else we're happy to, finish a bit early, give the time back for folks. Gather yourself between the next workshops we have for today. So yeah, let's keep an eye out for the questions here. All right. I think we're at a good point, Elias, maybe for us to call our presentation. So, and thanks everyone for joining in. And As both Julia and James mentioned, all the recordings and all this information will be available afterwards for your review.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone.
Take care.